Maine's energy plan for self-sufficiency. Listen carefully. There is none. Repeat, there is none. 2 years ago, that guy, Eric and Jim, asked me to get involved in an energy bill. I said, I don't know anything about energy. And after I read all the stuff on that bill, I knew even less. All I had was questions. I took the questions to the committee. The committee decided not to do what they were going to do based on my questions. That kind of blew me away. I got hooked. I have talked to lots of people over the last 2 years. And what I learned was there is no long-range policy for energy in Maine. What stands for it is almost entirely misconceived, barely competent, from a policy structure point of view, a hodgepodge, inadequately supported by sound data or substantial high-quality, multifaceted, and imaginative analytic support so badly needed for sound statewide policy. Those are strong words, and they are completely warranted. I got involved in conversations. I talked to a lot of people who were knowledgeable about this area. Broad consensus was that it's terribly important we do it. No, there isn't any ongoing, and until the governor is replaced, there won't be any. And I said to myself, I can't let it end there. This is too important. So I dug and dug and dug, and one of the things I learned, which Jim just referenced, is that Maine, you, me, everybody in this room, not state government, we as individuals send $6 billion a year outside of the state, never to be seen again, to purchase gasoline, heating oil, and natural gas. That's crazy. Absolutely crazy. Because that money leaves the state, never recirculates, and makes us hugely culpable in the climate change issue. That's a big number, $6 billion a year. You extend that over the 40 years that it will take to shift us from a fossil fuel-based economy to one based on indigenous renewable resources. That's $250 billion we're talking about. Do you think we could parlay that into a shift off fossil fuels to alternative indigenous sources of energy and hold harmless all of those who are going to be injured by that public policy change? Of course $250 billion could do that. And you talked about being a finance person. If you brought a bunch of financiers together and said, how could we make this transition from $6 billion a year going elsewhere to producing our own energy and hold harmless all of the people who have all the stranded assets of oil delivery and gasoline stations, et cetera, they'd say, well, let's put our minds to work at that problem. How could we do it? What would we have to borrow? How would we pay it back? How could we? It could be done. No question in my mind. Rather than go into the details, what we need is an energy transformation planning initiative on an unprecedented scale, multi-decade in length, entailing deep economic and technological, I'm going to use the word, imagineering. That planning should be directed to taking Maine off fossil fuels, midwiving us on to indigenous alternatives, and serving not so much corporations, international at that, or individual consumers. Yes, we all are, but we're not the ones that are important. It's the commons that is important. The whole population, now and 40 years from now. And, don't forget, the environment, which is part of our commons, both now and in the future. That takes planning and conceptualization on a scale that this body up here is absolutely unequipped to handle. Not because of the people who go there, but because the system partly has to do with the culture of the legislature, but the system does not support them with that kind of expertise. You know, they have legal analysts that support them, but not a brain trust that could be put to work looking at these kinds of real large-scale problems. A couple of vignettes to enter. One of the hearings last spring, what I did with all that knowledge I acquired was decided I'd be Johnny Appleseed, and I would go and testify last winter and spring to as many energy bills as I could from the perspective of a schema that I hammered together. It's, you know, it's probably not right in certain respects, but it's on a scale that says everything is related to everything else. And if we're going to talk about 4 decades, how's that going to relate to the purposes we have? How's that going to relate to who the stakeholders are? You know, bang, 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 bang. And on the text that you will all get a copy of, there's a copy of the website where that's all laid out. You can find the image and the model. But if we're going to do it on that scale, and here was a guy from one of the power companies testifying, looking for brownie points that they were going to pay for the new meters that had to be on houses that had solar panels. Even though he said energy demand for electricity, the demand curve for electricity has been flat for years. And I hear that and I think, wait a second, if we get off fossil fuels, the power is going to come to us through our electric wires, because that's where solar and wind and, you know, it's electricity we're going to be working on. It's not going to be flat. It's going to do this. They should be paying us. You all see the story in the paper a week ago where Germany is actually paying people to use power. They've got so much indigenous electricity coming from the sun. It's wild, you know. That's number one. Number two, I went to a presentation by the co-director of the energy planning project that's being run out of the governor's energy office, which is a travesty. And he actually got up and said, our job is not, I'm going to quote this, not to choose winners and losers. Excuse me? I mean, if we're serious about sustainability, somebody's got to make choices that says we are going to get off fossil fuels and we're going to get, you got to make those choices. And the winners, losers language is crazy. I mean, if we don't do anything, we're all losers. Okay. The governor's energy bill, LD 1547, it's an abject failure. I hope his ears are burning. Yeah, it would actually limit Maine's energy goals to 2 things: reducing electric rates and costs, and oh yes, air pollution. That's the only nod in the direction of the fact that the climate's going here, the air pollution. That's not what we're talking about, Governor. Anyway, I didn't critique the bill. I just rewrote the policy and told the committee, this is what you should be doing. And they did not act on the bill. They held it over to this session, so I'm going to be back. Well, I'm not going to be back. I worked for 10 days on putting together this stuff, but I was in Medford, Massachusetts. I went south for the winter because I'm too old to be dodging the snow piles under my eaves. Everybody needs to involve themselves in the energy issues. It's mind-numbing. You know, I wonder sometimes how long I can continue to do it, except you're in for a penny, you're in for a pound. I read the document that the Maine public advocate commissioned be written in response to Emera's request for a rate hike. And it's so busy looking back into the past in terms that are exclusively directed to, is Emera earning enough on its investment? Excuse me, you know, that's not the issue that the Commons wants to hear discussed. What we want to hear discussed is, how can we do the best we possibly can for Maine and the world? Nothing wrong with working for the world as well, by doing our part in what needs to happen. Get yourself involved in hearings of whatever kind, even if it's just saying what you think they ought to be doing and stop doing with what the committee calls the weeds of energy policy. One of the finest compliments I got last spring was a committee member who came up to me and said, "Thank you." I said, "For what?" She said, "For the different perspective you presented by talking about these things sort of at large." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, we spend so much of our time in the weeds of energy policy. You asked us to look to the hills, the valleys, and beyond. That's what we need." Okay, here are copies. Take one and pass back on your half.
Thank you.
Here are copies. Pass back. The website is on the sheet.
This is Facebook Live.
For you. It is www.mainelongrangeenergyplanning.com.
www.mainelongrange.
Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
www.mainelongrangeenergyplanning.com. It's on the, as I said, it's on the page. Come this way.